Hey team, so I wanted to go through a example rehab process we did with a client of ours last year, and this was an individual that was struggling with chronic back issues off the back of a disc-related issue that caused a lot of severe nerve issues and impairments down a particular side of their body, and it was impacting their quality of life in terms of being able to run, to be able to train, and to, of course, be able to move with thoughtless, fearless movement. So, what we're going to go through is kind of what the 12 weeks that we went through with the process and how we went from stage one all the way to returning to full level of activity. And this was done within 12 weeks. And this individual was down in the bottom of the country. So, we never actually met. This was all completely managed online. And this is just very much of a demonstration of how we can manage this online and how we can make it super specific for the individual, because their case was slightly different to majority of people with back pain, but is actually very, very similar to majority of people and what they struggle with. So I'm going to just go through the process, go through how we identified where the weaknesses were, and then from there, then go through each particular phase where there are 3 phases. So when we looked at phase 1, the main focus was obviously an element of kind of introductory movement. So you can see that we've split into 3 different main sessions, where you got a low back rehab phase 1, which is all about that rib cage and pelvis, and teaching people and teaching this individual on the importance of being able to control particular emotions with good breathing, good control. And at the end of the day, it's all there to give your nervous system a pocket of security. If you're able to do motions that are new, but you can control your breathing, your nervous system's going to learn and it's going to adapt. And what we'll tend to find is really powerful for people who are constantly in pain to be able to control key motions that they might do day to day, they might do in the gym, they might see other people do, but can do it with reason and with control. And breathing is a really, really good way of doing that. It's something that we use all the time, has a big influence on the nervous system. It allows us to move very, very quickly away from a kind of a fight or flight situation, which often not where majority of our pain can be experienced as sensitivity is increased, as fight or flight also increases. Then session 2 was very much around single leg strength stability. The reason this was brought in because this individual was a runner. So at the time this person was running, they were able to train, but they weren't able to kind of build any confidence with their running. So we stripped it all the way back. And we looked at a few things around running specific work that also linked to their injury history. They had a big ankle asymmetry. There was one ankle that had been experiencing more of the nerve issues than the other side. And then what we saw was that the weakness from that was obviously translating into their running and jumping performance, obviously causing a potential risk of force transfer issues up the chain. We then brought in a 3rd session, which was spinal decompression work. This is an individual that didn't like flexion. And so with flexion, I'm a big fan of opening up the spine to decompress it. So when the spine can move and open up, generally the hip can open up a little bit better as well, which links towards the pelvic mobility. And again, if you've got a rib cage, a pelvis, a hip, and a spine that have freedom, symptoms aren't going to be as triggered and as quickly to trigger on a day-to-day. So that was a big thing to be focused on. So you can see on the single leg strength days, there were 2 days. One was very much more knee dominant with an element of ankle specificity. The other one was very hip dominant with an element of more glute and posterior chain work alongside hip stretching work. So you'll see these drills if you're someone who's worked with us for a long time with kind of the midfoot bridge, the 3D quads, thoracic rotation-based drills are really, really common within the program just because they're really valuable and they work really well for us. So as you see, this person was able to focus on this program for 3 weeks, and the individual themselves was able to pretty much build a bit of confidence from this phase 1. And we identified really quickly with their feedback that they were having no issues, they were enjoying it, the symptoms were very, very low, and they were able to complete it with no additional stress on their chain. What I forgot to show you as well was actually how we modified their testing. So we'll usually have a battery of testing, which will be upper body, lower body, capacity, strength. But of course, with this individual, we didn't want to rush their testing just because we hadn't got the full awareness of what they could and couldn't do. And this was a busy individual. So what we did, we just did a little bit of lower body capacity and a movement screening where we're able to look at their standing assessment, which is their toe touch, side to side rotation and extension, overhead squat patterns, the heel off bridge test, which you'll see over the next couple of months in terms of some key movements that we use as a particular test and why it's important. And then, of course, the capacity, which we kept in just because from the nature of their training, we knew they'd be able to tolerate. If this was a person that was having acute bouts of pain, we wouldn't bring in capacity testing because this is very much the second stage of rehab. We would want to create a kind of a platform where we can build isometric strength and ribcage and pelvis control under safe confinements. Then we move into a second phase, which is very much isotonic, so under reps, capacity building, tolerance to a little bit of fatigue. And then third is that element of kind of plyos, ballistic, increasing the intensity with more thoughtless, fearless motions under the context of subconscious. The brain's doing the work for us. The beginning kind of isometric platform of rehab is very much conscious, it's controlled, and then as the continuous kind of progressions go on, we go from controlled to chaotic, just because that's the quality of training that majority of people are going to want to build towards, which is, again, real life scenarios. So after that kind of phase one, we kept it the same, and that's really important for people to understand. Your rehab doesn't have to change a lot. Like, you need to build a little bit of confidence with key movements, and you'll see that each movement has a dedicated progression. So for example, if I'm going to progress a wall sit level 2, which is just basically your foot slightly in front of your knee at a nice tall position, level 3 is going to be foot coming more kind of behind the knee, which puts more load through the quads and the knee. And then obviously level 4, 5, 6 is going to be maybe foot in front of the knee, foot within the knee, and then foot behind the knee, but then sinking deeper. So there's elements of progression that you'll see within the program. And then you will then see, as we move into phase 2, the additions we brought in here, we combined the ribcage and pelvis work to make a full pelvis drill where we've got an element of A1 to A3 is very glute and hip dominant. So we're actually building some tolerance from some isometric strength within a mini banded clams, which do have a bit of value, aren't useless as most people would say. I think they have a little bit of value if they're working to a good intensity. A prone bent knee leg extension is basically lying on your front, bending your knee and lifting your foot all to the sky, which again is just hip extension, a really valuable motion for running. And then sideline shift is bringing in that frontal plane where you're lying on your side, you're letting your leg get really long, you create like a hip lock drill, and then you're adding an element of hip abduction. You'll then see that we've combined the ribcage base drills, which is just a thoracic spine stretch where we're in for all fours, nice and rounded, breathing into our back and promoting more expansion through the ribcage, which again is valuable for settling a very sensitive nervous system, but also too, a lot of people get tightness around the neck and around the back when they're very hesitant to flex. So opening up the chest to create more flexion through the ribcage and protect the spine in a way by getting the upper part of our body to move better, so the spine doesn't have to hinge necessarily for us. And then pelvic tilt, halving, stretching, cobras are exercises you will see in the second part of the lower back rehab series, which is going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. Then we brought a little bit of progression into the running specific drills. So you'll see, obviously, we're building into level 2 and 3 for the wall sits, which is a big element of weakness that we saw with them through their quads and through their hips. And then we brought in some specific running drills like a hip lock drill, which is in essence a way that we teach the hip to stabilize in landing. So as the foot hits the ground when we run, we want the stance leg to stay high. We want the opposite leg to also stay high too. We don't want to see any sinking because this is going to just put more stress through the spine, more stress through the hips, and then of course more stress through the upper chain of the body. Then we've got a brilliant combination of standing drills that we use to build confidence from a single leg balance, perturbation, challenging that base of support. So we use a hip circuit, which is again, you're going to see within the program, where we use a lunge series of forward, back, side to side, and curtsies, which is like an element of a rotational lunge, which again gets the whole system working with all planes of motion, which we need to complete as humans. And then one kind of combination of drills that I use that are very undervalued are single leg banded strength work around hip flexion and hip abduction, which again, super valuable for runners. Then as we go into phase 3, as this individual was progressing really well, we ultimately started focusing on progressing more balanced coordination work within their rib cage and pelvis drills, making it a bit more running specific. So you'll see here that we started bringing the cable standard hip abductions into unassisted. So you're basically using a dowel in front of you to be your balance, and then actually challenging your center of mass from a side to side perspective, using your glutes to have to control both the stance position and then obviously the lift into the side position, which again is a beautiful drill if you've never tried it. And then building in some more lateral planar motions like a skater jump and progressing into motions that most people would never try if you're a long distance runner, just because it's an element of, doesn't really cross over to your type of training. But if you have a nervous system that can use all variations and has freedom to do so, then again, there's less risk of our nervous system wanting to trust and use our back more, which again, remember, is a really common part of low back rehab. Just get the lower back to do a little bit less. Okay, so what I'm going to show here is KPI number 1, which we use with this individual, which is a single leg balance position. So you'll see this individual really struggle to tolerate single leg positions, which again, as a runner is super valuable. And what we found over the course of the 12 weeks was we went from 30 seconds on each side with eyes open all the way to eyes closed for over a minute with no issues at all. And this is a really important part of training that people don't consider, is a KPI that doesn't have to be strength related, doesn't have to be power related. It can just be as simple as a single leg balance. Because again, you know that as a strength component, if we can balance and coordinate on one leg, we're going to have less issues going up the chain again. An important aspect as well in terms of KPIs, like we say, was the capacity testing. So if we use single leg squats in conjunction with a single leg balance, we found straight away that we were having a lot of problems with balance coordination, which you can see with a standing assessment, and the single leg squat wasn't looking super controlled, which again would make sense if they were having issues when they ran. So what we made a focus of was identify where we're weak. So on one side they could tolerate 25, but with the control you can see there, and then 16 on the right, which was again slightly worse, more fatiguing. This is the side where we had more neural involvements, we had less control. And again, this is something that you don't often know unless you test it. This individual was able to get to, I think they got to 60 by the end. Yeah, 60 on each side. And they were doing it with much better control. You'll see the speed and control is there. The hesitancy is incredibly low. And obviously the fitness and the tolerance to get to over 60 reps is incredible. Our target is just above 30. And just to finish, as we moved on to phase 3, which is again just building into that coordination, balance, and strength and stability on each leg, you can see that the capacity numbers did improve to above 16, way above our targets as an initial KPI. I do not need to add that we didn't have any access to strength testing with this individual, so it was unable for us to get any leg extension, hamstring curl, or any leg press data just because of the gym that they used. But again, it was something that we often do come across. Sometimes we don't have access to maybe a valve kit that we do here to test those markers, or don't have access to particular machines because of the type of gym that you go to. We just use capacity heavily within our focus. So the single leg squat and the single leg balance hold were the two main KPIs that we used in conjunction with symptoms. So we just kept this really simple and just monitored 3 main targets of, can we improve those 2 KPIs I've just mentioned? And then in terms of symptoms, can we just keep an eye on kind of where are we at in the morning, how are the symptoms presenting during day to day after training? And by week 7 on the way to kind of week 12, where we were within phase 3 of the program, we generally didn't have any symptoms during training, during day-to-day in their job, during any of these additional rehab motions. And you'll see, again, like the check-ins were extremely valuable for us to know this. There were no things that we needed to add or kind of complement their work. The feedback started to die down as we started getting to back normality, which is normal. But what we did find that the more we focused on drills that were specific to the type of training they wanted to basically run, we found the motivation was super, super consistent from there. If this was an individual that just wanted to run and all I did was try and improve, say, strength and slow and control type training, which again is valuable for some people, but not for this individual, then I might have really struggled to get the motivation and the compliance which we saw with this individual, which was kind of the main reason they improved. They were consistent. This individual showed up every day. I think they barely missed a session in the first 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then a work period came in and they did miss 1 or 2 sessions, but they were so consistent with everything else. That's the biggest part of low back rehab that people do not recognize. The consistency is all that matters, because low back problems are going to stem for a good chunk of time. They do not go really quickly. And we do need to sometimes restore particular KPIs like plank and core strength and trunk testing and then capacity. But as long as you're showing up every day, you're doing something, your movement is often not going to help you feel better about yourself, because you start to feel that you're not fragile anymore. And I think that's really important to consider when it comes to low back rehab. It can be specific to you and it doesn't have to be the same as someone else. But as long as you show up and you do the work, you will get there. And that's a really, really important thing to consider, because like I said in my previous presentation, the prognosis is really good for majority of back issues. It's the people that stop and then hit a bit of a hiccup that don't do well. And this is the most consistent kind of individual I worked with. And we saw that for a really, really chronic back issue in conjunction with some serious nerve related issues, they're back running 5Ks and they're hitting some amazing targets, which again, they never thought they would be able to do. So take that as the main focal point from today. Show up, make sure you do the work, feedback. The more feedback is always the better. Film and educate yourself in terms of how you've gone from here to here, how one movement looked versus this movement from kind of week 1 to week 12. And you'll surprise yourself, because that's really important. Not everything needs to be super objective. If we can, we will. But like I said, keep it simple sometimes. A simple balance test, a simple capacity test, and then a simple kind of pain monitoring test was all I needed for this individual. And this was the simplest of programs I've had to ever develop someone. So yeah, link this to the previous presentation in terms of understanding the rib cage, the pelvis, how we work on building strength through the rest of the chain. So the force transfer is a little bit more efficient. And this is going to complement the phase 2 to 3 in terms of the exercise we use to really, really improve back pain for good. And then more importantly, understanding the phases from phase 1 to phase 3. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.